Hello everyone, I am M4J and welcome back to the OpenTTD tutorial series. This is my third attempt at recording this video for various reasons. Basically, when the game has changed so much since I last played, there's a couple of things that have moved. So I've had to relearn them, and I've been learning them as I've been recording this video here. So that's nice. Anyway, last time out, I showed you track laying. So we talked about the railway principles here in the UK: up lines, down lines, fast lines, slow lines, different junction types, straddle tracks, pair tracks, all that kind of thing. And as a little test bed, I built this line here between Rentwood in the south of the map and Garston in the north. And we built this passing loop in the middle, which is mainly here for decorative purposes. I won't lie to you. Chances are we won't really use the passing loop much, but we're going to signal it today anyway, because today is all about signaling. Now, before we start, I've had to change a few settings here and there, speed limits, all that kind of thing. So now if I go into the window here, you'll see that the speeds are actually in miles per hour, because last time they were in kilometers per hour, which is kind of annoying. But it's now correct, which is good. And the other thing is the signals here are a little bit different, but I think I've got my head around how they work now. So this is the signal window. The only things you really need to worry about are the ones that are on screen right now. There are a couple of other things that I'm going to point out in a second, but these are the fundamentals. So you've got color aspect signals and you've got semaphore signals. Depending on when you start, these are the two types of signal that you will have. If you have other types of signal that you've downloaded as new GRFs, then this may be more extensive. I'm using the multi-aspect new GRF by JGR. So some of these as well might look a little bit different, like the color aspect signals here might look a little bit different. They've got 4 lights instead of 3. We'll talk about what that means in a bit. Basically, everything should be pretty standard here. For those of you that like to challenge yourself, if you click this box here in the top right corner, it opens up the full signal panel. And this might be more familiar to you guys. So you've got different types of signal here. You've got block, entry, exit, combo, programmable pre-signal, path signal, and path signal one way. Now, to put that in context, if I was to place this one down here, this is as far zoomed in as I can get, unfortunately, but you can see the board at the back, which is basically a no entry sign. And one other thing to note is this is facing the signal. So if you're looking to the right hand side here, you're facing the signal. The two-way signal here, it allows trains through in either direction, but it only impacts really, it only stops trains that are heading towards it, trains that are facing it. And that will be important in a second when it comes to programmable signals, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So the way I like to signal my routes is as follows. On this window, which is the one I was faced with just now, I was very confused because I wasn't expecting to not see block signals here. Also, the JGR multi-aspect signals, they add shunt signals. We don't need to worry too much about them. Basically, that's a path signal still, two-way path signal. It's just an aesthetic thing. So we're not going to focus on those today. How I signal railways is thus. These are block signals. You can see how they work. One other thing that I need to activate quickly, and actually that might be one of the reasons why that window is a little fuller than I was expecting. So if I switch on realistic braking, and if I switch that on as well, we'll talk about what these do later in a separate video, in fact. There we go, we now have blocks. So you have blocks, path signals, and path signals one way. These are the only 3 types of signal you need to worry about. Whether they're semaphores or whether they're color aspects is irrelevant in this case. The only thing you need to worry about is this. Now, the way I like to signal my routes is thus. You place one there like that. You place one there like that. Now, I mentioned last time out how using the control key can access hidden features. For example, with track laying, you can remove track by pressing and holding control. This is very similar. There's something that not many people know about is if you place a signal like this, press and hold the control key, the left hand control key on your keyboard, click on the signal and just drag it one tile. You see we've spent some money. I'll show you what we've spent that on in a second. Do the same thing on this side. Notice how that signal's changed from red to green? That's important. If I was to now follow this along, you can see that we've actually placed signals at a predetermined length all the way along the track. You'll also notice these ones here are amber. Ignore those. We'll come back to that in a second as to what exactly that means. Now I've chosen 13 here, which just happens to be the gap that I use between signals on 2-track main lines like this. You can set it to anything you like. You can set it to 1. You can set it to, I think 20 is the highest. Might even be able to go higher now. No, 20 is the highest. But I set it to 13 for 2-track main lines. I set it to 11 on slow lines, and I set it to 15 on fast lines. But actually, that standard will be changing soon on the M4J network. I think I'm going to signal everything at 13 tiles apart. But if you follow all the way along here, you can see 13 tiles apart, there are signals. Now, this one here is a very good example. We have a junction here. This click and build method only works as far as a junction or a station. It does cover level crossings, I believe, but it doesn't cover junctions and it doesn't cover stations. So I'm going to place a one-way path signal at the end there. And again, you'll notice that signal's now changed from red to amber. If I go back to the station over here, I'm going to hit this button here, which is the signal convert tool. And I'm going to click this one here, and it's changed it to a path signal as well. I'm then going to do the same thing on this side, except I'm going to change it to a 2-way path signal rather than a 1-way path signal. It might seem like a waste of a signal, but it's quite important later. I'm also going to place two-way path signals at the exit of the platforms here as well. Again, it doesn't look like it's worth doing right now, but it becomes important later. I'm now going to signal the rest of this line. The other thing I'm going to do is place another 2-way path signal on the junction exit there. And then I'm going to signal from the station backwards again, just because it helps. It helps with signal distances and stuff like that. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to move that across, and I'm going to place these two signals like this. Now, entrance and exit signals and combination signals and things like that, they do still have a place in OpenTTD. I've seen people use them, and again, it's personal preference, really. It's play styles. I think there is a place for them. However, it's not really something that I tend to do myself. So that's why I'm not really talking about those, because I don't feel like I'm qualified really to talk about what those are and what those do. I am also going to actually remove those two signals there. I'll explain why momentarily. Now, the temptation is to put some other block signals in here. And actually, I might end up doing that. Let's just do that, because that's about halfway. Again, we've got some signals here that are amber. I'll talk about what those are in a second. So this route is basically set up and ready to go now. What these one-way signals here ensure is that trains only enter the station on that line and only exit the station on that line. Theoretically, they can enter the station on this line as well, but not if they're heading from beyond this signal here, because the rule is with block signals, trains can only enter block signals from one direction. And if they come in from the wrong direction, they won't be able to pass. They'll turn around automatically if you've got that setting enabled, of course. Now, as for how to program these signals, this is something that can be quite basic or quite advanced. It depends on your preference. Me, I'm kind of a middle ground. So the way I'm going to do this is as so. I'm going to select these signals like this. Now, to do this, you hit the cogwheel up the top here. This is the route finding restriction. Some people, there is another cog that appears if I was to, actually I can't do it because I've got realistic braking enabled, but there is another cogwheel that you can use. Be sure to hit the top one. The top one's the important one. Select both of these signals, hit share, and do that. Now what this means is if I do anything to this top signal, so if I add an if command, you see it's automatically added it to the bottom one. Now I'm just going to do something very, very simple here. I'm going to say if entry, I'm going to click on the wrong thing quite simply. If entry direction is from the back, then you click here and you'll say speed restriction. There it is. Click on there and set it to 15. Then if you click on this end and say if entry direction, and it defaults to the front so we can skip to the next stage, speed restriction, and we'll set it to something like 25 for now. This is realistic speed limits. This is something that I have used for quite some time now. I've used it in various different formats. I used to do it via waypoints, but that became quite tedious. Signaling is the best way to do it. I also used to do it with multiple signals lined up, which you might have seen in the last episode. I had a section of track with multiple signals placed a tile apart. That was fine, but again, it's not the most efficient way to do it. So I changed it so that sorry, I didn't change it. What am I talking about? Realistic braking changed it so that the train sees the signal ahead and tries to slow the train down realistically so that by the time it hits that signal, it is traveling at the speed that that signal wants the train to travel at. So in this case, it will be 15 miles an hour in and 25 out. And in fact, already I want to change this from 15 to 10. And again, you can see it's changed it to 10 at the top and it's changed it to 10 at the bottom. If I close those windows now, the next stage is this one here. Now this one's quite simple. We can literally just say speed restriction 25. One other thing I forgot to mention here, you see where it says entering from the back? That's if a train is heading this way and reaches the back of the signal first. So again, this is where I talk about front-facing, back-facing signals. So signals can affect trains from behind, but a train can't stop at a signal if it's not facing the signal, if that makes sense. So if the signal is not, if the signal's not facing the train is probably a better way of saying it. So yes, this signal here is set to 25 miles an hour. So if a train approaches, no matter what that train is doing, it automatically slows to 25 miles an hour. This exit signal here, not to be confused with the exit signal type, this is just a junction exit signal, which is why I place it facing the wrong way. We're going to say if entry direction, which, there it is. There's a lot of extra options added here as well since I last played, which is very confusing. Now again, with speed limits, on a 2-track main line like this, I would say the maximum speed, realistically speaking, is 75 miles an hour. There are some around the UK that reach speeds of 100, 125, whatever it might be. But considering this is a pretty rural branch line type setup here, I would say 75 miles an hour is pretty realistic. Now, I can actually cut some corners here. If I select these two entry signals here at the platform, I can copy from one of them, not share in this case, just copy, and then hit share on this one and do that. Also, you'll notice this is the go-to function on a signal. It used to be at the top, but it's moved to the bottom now, which again was quite confusing first time it happened, but I'm quite used to it now. And you'll see that these are now shared with each other, but they're not shared with the two at the other end of the line, which means if I make a change here, I don't have to go back and fix the mistake at the other end. These two here, the top one is the entry signal. So I can go back to this end of the line and I can copy from that one, and then the bottom one, whoops, copy from that one. Now you might notice these signals now have blue posts. If I compare that to path signals over here that don't have blue posts, the blue post just means that the signal has something attached to it. It has a routing restriction attached to it. It's an aesthetic thing. It doesn't change the functionality of the signal. And I just have that set up right now so that you can see which signals have been changed and I can see which signals have been changed. Because ultimately, that's important, basically. Now, this is the passing loop. And this is where things get a little bit more technical, shall we say. I want to make sure that fast trains use the center pair of tracks and slow trains use the outside pair of tracks. The best way to do this that I've discovered is to set routing restrictions on these signals here, which is why these exist. So if I select this one here, I'm going to hit share and I'm going to share it with that one. So whatever I change on this one is going to affect this one, and that's why they've got blue posts, because they both have routing restrictions attached to them. I'm going to say if. Sorry, I'm not going to say if. I'm going to start with a pretty blanket term here. I'm going to go to deny. That means no train right now can pass this signal in either direction. Some people don't put a deny as the first part of their signaling. I tend to do it purely because it removes any chance of mistakes. There are other complications involved with this, which I'll come to in a minute, but for the most part, this is the best way I've found to do this. I'm then going to say if entry direction is from the back. And again, this is a fairly broad thing to do at this point, because trains are really only going to approach from the back, but it just means that if there is one coming from the front at any point for any reason, it won't be affected by what I'm about to say here. So if train is entering from the back, then if, let's say maximum speed, which is the maximum speed of the vehicle that is approaching the signal, and I'm going to say here, so you've got is and is not, which are basic statements. So, you know, if the maximum speed of the train is 100 miles an hour, then it will move on to the next step. If it isn't, then it will move on to the next step. Now I want to go with something different. So you've got greater than or equal to, and then you've got less than or equal to. Now in this case, I want to say less than or equal to, and then hit this one and do 75 miles per hour. And then finally, I'm going to do an allow, which is you choose deny, and then you change it there to allow. Now this is basically a flow chart. So the deny is the first thing. You can imagine you're trying to get from the start to the end. So deny, no train is allowed through this signal. But if the train is entering from the back of the signal, which in every case it will, move on. If the max speed of that train is less than or equal to 75 miles per hour, then allow. If not, that train isn't allowed through this signal. Now, to compare that to this side, I'm going to copy this one, except I'm going to change this to... wait, that's not... I always get these wrong. Less than or equal to is that one. And then greater than, which is what I want this one to be, is that one. There we go. I knew I was going to make that mistake when I started planning out this episode. And I'm just going to get this one here, and I'm going to share it like so. So this is routing restrictions now. So if a train's coming from the top here, and it's coming down towards this signal, and its top speed is 60 miles per hour, it will take the top track here. If its top speed is 80 miles per hour, it will take this track here. Now bear in mind, no train is going faster than 75 miles per hour at this point, but it is the ultimate max speed of the train that is considered when it decides where to route these trains. So say for example we had a Pacer that's coming down this track. Its top speed is 75 miles per hour, so it will take the outer track. If an HST is coming down here, even though it's going 75 miles per hour, its top speed, its theoretical top speed that it can operate at in service, is 125. And therefore it will continue straight on, and it will take the center pair of tracks. This is how we do overtaking, basically. This is also how you can separate your fast lines from your slow lines. You could do it through waypoints as well, and actually on the M4J network it's mostly done through waypoints, purely for simplicity reasons. But if you wanted to do it through small bursts like this for a passing loop, you make sure that you set it up through the route restrictions. This can also work for when you're allocating platforms at large stations as well, but we'll come to that in a future video. Now the reason I haven't put a path signal at the ends here for the fast lines is because we've also got something called route reservation, which is part of realistic braking. So as a train approaches a path signal or even a block signal, it will look ahead the length that it takes the train to stop from the speed that it's traveling at. So if a train's traveling at 125 miles per hour and it takes, let's say, 15 tiles to stop, which is probably more than it needs, but for the sake of this argument, let's say that is the case. As soon as it passes through this signal, it will automatically reserve a path right the way through here and through this next path signal as well, and in this case back onto the main line. That's the case for all rail vehicles. They all have, once realistic braking is enabled, they all have stopping distances. The reason I've set the passing loop up like this is so that fast trains will reserve the track ahead here. So if they're following directly behind a slower train, the slower train will have to wait in the loop here and allow it to pass. Now there are ways to do that through route restriction. You can actually set here a what's called long reserve. Now this is something I've not really used before, so I can't tell you how well this works. But from what I've gathered, long reserve means it will automatically reserve the paths ahead of it until it's told to not do any more. So for this one here, for example, you could say long reserve and cancel. Now I don't want to do this. If you want to remove any restrictions that you've placed on a signal, by the way, you just hit reset. Or you can remove individual ones by just clicking remove. Now there's loads of other things you can do with signals here. You can add counters. You can change signal mode control. I have no idea what that does, to be honest. News control, so you can get a little news update here every time a train passes the signal. Penalty, which is something that I might come back to later, but again, it's something I don't tend to use very often, but it is something I know how it works. And then there's also slot operation. So if you know about token operation here in the UK, on a single track section of line, for example, only the train that has a token is allowed to access that track. You might see at Heritage Railways, they pass what looks like a little leather pouch on a hoop from the signalman to the driver and vice versa, or the fireman in this case, and vice versa. That's the token. Inside the little pouch is the actual token itself. The rest of it is just apparatus to enable the passing of the token to be done easier. That can be operated here as well through slot operation. But again, it's something I've not really dabbled with much myself. I'm actually starting to learn how to do it so that I can basically implement it in the M4J network. Now, one other thing worth mentioning here is the variables that you can use with the if function. So you see here we've got if train is entering from back of signal. Entry direction tends to be quite an important one that I use. Not necessarily for you guys, you might do things differently, but for me that's the one I use. These are all the if functions. So you might have train length, you might have short sets, long sets, whatever it might be. You can organize what trains go through what signals based on their length. Max speed, which is one we've already done. Current order or next order. These are useful if you've got waypoints. These are also useful if you've got stations where some platforms are terminus platforms and some platforms are through platforms. That might be something that I come back to in a future video. But to show you an example of that, let's say over here at Rentwood, if I was to build another platform, I don't want to go too much into detail with it, so I'm just going to build it like that. And let's say we had, imagine as well that this is connected up. It's just for simplicity's sake here. You might have an add-on to this, which is if the train is terminating and reversing, then let it into these two platforms. But if it's continuing onwards, then let it into this platform. The good advantage of that is this platform here could still be used for terminating trains. And actually, that's a really good way to add the penalty. So say you want this platform, excuse me, I had to edit some of this video out just now because I had a massive coughing fit, so if my voice sounds a bit different, that's why. Let's say you want this platform to still be used for terminating trains, but you don't necessarily want it to always be used for terminating trains. That's where the penalty comes in. So you can have a small pathfinder, medium, large, or custom. Medium tends to work for what I want to do. So basically, imagine every time a train approaches a signal, it measures the distance and time it takes to get to this track here, let's say. And let's say it takes 10. This one here might take 11, so it will prefer to go straight on. Now let's say you add this extra add-on here, and it would take 12. But you can also add a pathfinder penalty to take that 12 and turn it into something like 20. And that means that these two platforms will always be the preference. But if the journey to get into here is longer than 20 for whatever reason, say there's a train blocking it, or you might add another pathfinder penalty to this signal here, then this signal here becomes the preferred option and the train will use it. So that's useful for, like I said, if you want to terminate trains here and the other two platforms are occupied, instead of sitting at this signal for a day and a half, the train will actually progress and head into this platform instead. Now that will block trains that are going through, but it does mean you can increase the capacity of your station without necessarily changing the order of the platforms and things like that. So that's also something that's quite useful. Now, one other thing. Over here, realistic speed limits. These two signals here, we're going to chain together. And we're going to do it like this. We're then going to do something very similar to what we've done over here, except we're not going to add any deny. Excuse me. I have a really weird throat today, and I think that's why my voice is going all funny. I'm just going to get this up for a second so I can remind myself what symbol I need. That one. 75 miles per hour. Then set maximum speed, which is there, speed restriction. And I'm going to set it to 45. Now, this is a standard that I've used in a lot of places on the M4J network, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the standard that you guys use either. It's just the one I use. Excuse me. One other thing, I'm going to hit this one and I'm going to share with that one there. And I'm basically going to do the same as I did at the station exit, which is if entry direction is from the back, then speed restriction sets to 75. Now this means if a pacer or a DMU is coming down here, obviously its maximum speed is not greater than 75, so it will be using the slower tracks. So to change track, it will slow down to 45 miles per hour here, and it will change onto the outer track. Now I could add a thing here to speed the train back up and then slow it down again at this end, but I think I might as well keep it at 45 because again it lets the faster train catch up and eventually pass. There are more complications even to this, and this is kind of the last part of the video. I'm going to add a second if command here, and I'm going to change this to cargo passengers. Now if you select something here, you can hit these arrow keys to move them up or down. So in this case, the restrict is now being moved up. I want all passenger trains to slow down to to travel at 75 miles per hour. But I want my freight trains to operate at 60. So the best way to do that is to select the line below the end here and then say if cargo, change this one to can't, passengers is default, so that's fine. Then the speed restriction here will be set to 60. And again, this is a common thing in the UK. The maximum speed of most freight trains is 60 miles per hour. There are some cases where freight trains can travel faster, but more often than not, the maximum speed is 60. And I want passenger trains to travel at 75, and therefore we have our setup here. Now, one thing I can do is select this one here, and select this one here, and get them to do the same. I'm going to do a copy rather than a share, just to make sure they do what I want them to do, without messing around with, having to set certain parameters and stuff like that. So now, excuse me, I had another coughing fit just now. Now to summarize as follows. A train will come into the station here at 75 miles an hour. It'll hit this signal and it will slow down to 25. It'll cross over these junctions. As soon as it hits the back of this signal, it will slow down to 15. When it leaves and the rear of the train passes this signal, it will speed back up to 25. Once it reaches this signal, if it's a passenger train, excuse me, once the rear passes, it will speed up to 75 miles per hour. If it's a freight train, it will speed up to 60. When we get to here, if the train can go faster than 75 miles per hour, it will take the inside tracks and it won't change speed at all. And that includes ones that are running at 75 miles per hour. Just because it's limited to 75 miles per hour here doesn't mean its maximum speed is 75 miles per hour. Hopefully that makes sense. If the maximum speed is not 75 miles per hour, if it's greater than 75 miles per hour, it will use the ascent tracks. If If it is 75 miles per hour or less, it will slow down to 45 miles per hour, and it will take this diverging track here. And it will travel through the outer tracks, and then it will rejoin. Where once it passes this signal, it will speed back up to 60 or 75, depending on whether it's a passenger train or not. There is one more thing that you can potentially do here. And that is to say, this signal here, add one more if cargo can carry passengers, then allow. This one, if maximum speed is 75 miles per hour or less, or if cargo can't carry passengers. Now, the or is another important thing. So you see, we've got two very unrelated things here. Maximum speed and the cargo that the train can carry are not related to each other whatsoever, and yet either of them can see this train pass through this signal. This is kind of a useful way to separate freight trains from passenger trains as well. And it will mean now that every freight train will use the outer track no matter how fast it can go. So even if the loco has a maximum speed of 80 miles per hour, which as we all know is greater than 75, purely because it's a freight train, it will still slow down and it will still use the outer track. And there is technically one more thing that I can do for this as well, which is to say that if that's what I was looking for, cargo can carry passengers, then slow down to 45, and then a separate if underneath, if cargo can't carry passengers, then slow down to 30, which is, again, my personal preference for freight traffic through junctions. Doesn't necessarily have to be yours. That, I think, does it for signals. There are lots of other complicated things to do with signals, many of which aren't necessarily relevant to what we're doing here. They certainly don't pay any relevance on the M4J network. Like I said, there's things like reserve through, long reserve, wait at particular signals, which is as... Yeah, it does say... I thought it said waft then, but no, it says wait. Which you can set a train to wait for a specific trigger or something like that. But again, it's not really something I like to do. And likewise here, so many other things. Now, one other thing that's important, I suppose, is the entry signal. So again, if you've got, say you have another track arriving here as well, and you want to make sure that this line goes into this platform and the other line goes into the other platform, you can set a signal to only let a train through if it comes from a specific signal. So if it comes through this one, it'll get a green light and it will go through into here. If this platform's occupied for whatever reason, obviously that can't happen until that platform is unoccupied again. And again, you can use penalties and all sorts of things to basically funnel your trains through tracks that you specifically want them to run along. You can also have things like weight, power, maximum traction effort, maximum weight, power to weight ratio, all that kind of thing. Again, it's kind of irrelevant. Train group, train owner. Train group is one that you should definitely avoid, because if you move a train into a different group, accidentally or deliberately, it will no longer be allowed to pass through that signal, which can become problematic, of course. Load percentage is also important. You may recall I have freight terminals on the M4J network. I have my mineral trains allocated to certain platforms depending on whether they're full or empty. And that's where load percentage comes in. So you can have 0, 100, 50, 33.5, whatever you want. You can set it up for that. Train in slot is also to do with token occupancy and things like that. The counter value, so if a train goes past 9 times, the 10th one you might not let it through for whatever reason. There's loads of other things that you can set up. None of them right now are particularly relevant to me, so I'm not going to mention them. If you guys want to play my playstyle, they're not relevant to you either. If you want to explore them yourself, you're more than welcome to do so, of course. That will do it for this episode, though. We are ready to start building depots and adding trains to the network. And we're going to continue to mess around with signals. You might see me add some other signal programming as we go through. We're going to build a depot. We're going to start running trains. So next episode, I'm going to show you how I build my depots, which is something else that was quite requested. And we're going to start talking about, sidings, vehicle maintenance, all kinds of complicated things like that. But until then, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button if you find this video helpful or if you just enjoyed it. Oh, one more thing, actually. Yes, there is one more thing, and I haven't tested this yet. So this might be different to what I'm about to say. These orange lights. Completely forgot about these. In the UK, we have single aspect signals, which is where there's only one light, and it can be red or green. Sometimes it can be yellow as well, but more often than not, it'll be red or green. We then have dual aspect, which is where we have a red above a green, or a green above a red, depending on which way around it is. We then have three aspect signals, which are probably the most common on two-track main lines, which this kind of is, which is pretty self-explanatory. You've got three lights. And then you have four aspect, which is actually what this one here is. So four aspect is, there are four stages of light. There are green, there are red, which are these ones here. There are single yellow, and then there are double yellow. What this is, it tends to be on lines with speeds of 100 miles per hour or more. Sometimes there are exceptions, but basically you'll come along and there'll be a green light. Then the next one might be double yellow, which means the next one after that will be a single yellow, and the next one after that will be a red. Double yellow just means prepare to start slowing down. Single yellow means prepare to slow down, or prepare to stop, and red means stop. These are, again, on the East Coast main line where I grew up, these are the ones I was most familiar with. These are rare for this game. These are quite new. This is part of the multi-aspect new GRF. Sorry, I hesitated then because I thought I was about to start coughing. Excuse me. I'm going to have a big glass of water after this, I think, before I record the next video. I don't know if this actually affects things to do with realistic braking. There is a setting that enables it. I haven't discovered for myself. If you do know whether or not it does, let me know in the comments. That would be really helpful. My guess is, with realistic braking enabled and the advanced setting enabled, as soon as the train sees a double yellow aspect, it will start to slow down as if it was preparing to stop. If it hits a single yellow, it will continue to slow down as if it's prepared to stop. Where I don't know what the effect is whether or not every path signal will end up stopping a train. Because on this logic, a path signal is red until a train approaches it, then it does the calculations to see whether the train can pass through or not, and then it turns green. We're actually going to find out in a couple of episodes' time when we start planning out trains, whether or not this will be a red signal or a green signal. It'll become exciting. My guess is when it reaches a certain point, this signal might turn green because this one's turned green. And then, we'll start again. Or this one might become yellow depending on where we are, or double yellow depending on where we are here. I don't know. We're going to find out together on that one. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to hit the like button if you found this video helpful or if you just enjoyed it. Drop those comments down below. Feedback on the episodes is always really appreciated. Any ideas for future tutorials? Any mistakes that I might have made, feel free to correct me. It would be very much appreciated. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more tutorials just like this. Like I said, next time we're going to be doing depot building, which is kind of one step closer to getting trains running. So if that's the kind of thing you want to see, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you don't miss that upload. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. And until next time, I will see you soon.